From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Digital Banter podcast. You have myself, Andy Groller, and of course, James Kravick, as always.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Today's topic is maximizing the efficiency of your media dollars. Now, in our conversations with clients, we've heard a lot about efficiency, effectiveness, and really, constrained budgets in many regards as we head into 2023. And honestly, in the outlook as we look forward, at least through the first half. So if we want to call it such, 2023 is potentially the year of efficiencies. And that's what we're talking about today, specifically as it relates to media dollars. Now, James and I might have differing opinions about what efficiency means and things like that. So why don't we kind of get a lay of the land here first around, defining efficiency. James, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it comes down to getting the most revenue out of your media dollars. It comes directly back to return on investment and not wasteful. That's kind of really the two things.
I'm going to take that one step further. And my definition of efficiency when I'm talking with clients, but also just in general, efficiency really comes down to maximizing the impact of every dollar and squeezing as much out of it as you can, squeezing as much investment out of it as you can. But that also kind of alludes to, what does impact mean? Us being an agency that focuses on B2B brands, this is a little bit more narrowly defined, I think, than the broader marketing picture. To many B2B brands, this comes down to leads, MQLs, opportunities and pipeline, and ultimately revenue. We've talked about that at length, obviously, on previous podcasts, and just in general, and we're out there either, posting content on LinkedIn or talking to various individuals and peers. Sure, there's other initiatives that might come into play when we're talking about impact. But when the CEO, the CFO, and those other executives really sit down and get right down to it, look, when they're talking about efficiency, when they're talking about impact, they are looking to get out of it as much as they are putting into it. They want to see that ROI, as James just talked about. Looking at this through the lens of media dollars, then, all advertisers seem to be wanting to put as much of their budget into media spend as possible. And what do we mean by that? We're talking about pure ad dollars. And James, I know this is kind of something that you've had conversations about with clients, but even prospective clients a lot over the last 6 months. Do you want to touch on kind of what I mean by really focusing their investment on as much of the media dollars as possible?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like with, again, budgets being cut back, it seems like the approach that's been taken is cutting specific line items and different tools and different aspects of things that they're using for their paid media campaigns, tools, creative, all of that stuff, where there's almost this belief that like the waste of spend is what's going towards tools, creative. And they really think that the most efficient way to run their media campaigns is putting as much money towards media costs as possible. So serving impressions, right? That's where they want the majority of their money to go. And, I think the big thing that we're seeing is when you start to cut some of the tools out of the picture, some of the creative out of the picture, you actually lose a ton of efficiency because that's what those tools are in place for. That's what the creative is in place for. That's why you are using measurement tools. That's why the reason you're using data targeting tools is to be more efficient with that media spend. It even comes down to something that we deal with as an agency when we're putting together scopes for new products, right? We work on a percentage of media spend, and there are people who come in and are like, hey, we need to have our percentage of media spend at X. And it's like, okay, that's great that like some other agency gave you that rate, but it also comes down to you get what you pay for in that scenario, right? So again, I'm being a little biased here that I would assume, though, the more you would pay for an agency, the better value that they are going to provide, right? And that's, how I feel when we get stacked up against kind of some of the run-of-the-mill agencies that are out there is that, we are providing a higher level of service. We have more senior level experts on our team who are going to spend your money more efficiently than, a turn and burn agency that has a customer lifetime value of 6 months, right? So, and it's the same thing with tools. It's you get what you pay for in the efficiency. And I would look at tools and creative as an opportunity to be more efficient rather than, hey, we need to have as much money from going to media as possible. Like, you can cut 90% of what we do as our jobs is cut wasted media spend and reinvest it in areas that are better performing. Like, you can take that money and invest it in areas and be more efficient.
The point that you're making is completely valid and something that we've seen over the years for sure. But I think over the last, we'll say 2 to 3 years, not even the last 6 months, the last 2 to 3 years has become a little bit more of a conversational point. And really it comes up in the fact of scrutinizing not just the overall cost of a campaign or working through and paid media as a whole, but really scrutinizing what those line items look like of, in particular, media spend versus other fees. And we're talking about other fees. You're spot on, James. We're not just talking about agency fees. We're talking about other tech fees or creative fees, things that ultimately make or break the success of those media dollars. The TLDR version of this is, how much more waste are you going to throw at a wall when you finally realize that you're not actually gaining effectiveness or efficiencies by skimping out, right? By being cheap. And our preparation for this podcast, I could feel myself kind of getting a little amped up and ready for this in the sense of you get what you pay for, right? James is exactly right. You get what you pay for. Being cheap at the end of the day results in poor results versus investing in the right tools, partners, and really the deliverables that actually not just drive efficiencies, but ultimately ROI. I mean, James, how many times have we heard clients say, for example, they're going to do creative in-house just to save a few bucks, only to get, to be quite honest, probably some of the worst creative we've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, with every situation, though, it's going to be a case-by-case scenario of what you should be investing in and what you shouldn't be investing in, right? Like, if you have a budget of, a smaller budget, I wouldn't go and invest in a bunch of measurement tech. Like, it's probably not worth it. If you have 8 different channels running, that all have different attribution models, like, yeah, I might want to consider some sort of level of tech to help interpret data and drive better results. And the creative is in the same state. Like, the more you spend, the more creative that you should have, the better the creative that you should have. But a creative kind of falls in its own scenario because quality is super important, right? Like, in your best things that you've referenced, like, we've gotten some ads that looked like they were from 1990, right? And we're like taking like stuff with drop shadows on the back. I mean, borderline to the point where they might have animated text. And these are from like large enterprise companies who, I mean, we're talking billion-dollar companies that are putting out creative like this. So there's obviously a value there of having better creative leading to better performance. And I can cite some of those examples when we get in there later, but.
So, I mean, creative is obviously one example here. The other example that we were both kind of talking about, though, too, is when it comes back to targeting. And I think this really, it comes down to somewhat of a lack of education in many cases, where brands and their internal marketing teams either don't understand the full landscape of what's available to us as digital marketers today compared to what it was even 2 to 3 years ago, right? The changes in targeting enhancements, but in reality, removals for many of the platforms, whether it's privacy reasons or just changes in the entire landscape. Facebook and Instagram are perfect examples there of stripping out so much of, B2B targeting that makes it inefficient unless you get creative at this point in time. So there's that lack of education, but I think there's also the lack of education and strategic partnership that comes from getting what you pay for in the agencies that you might be working with, or the partners and the consultants that you're working with, where they're order takers. They're just doing what you're told, and they're not really having you as the brand in your best interest or in their best interest in the recommendations and the education that they should be providing to you. So I think there is that level of compassion and empathy that I do have in some regards for internal stakeholders and internal marketers. The other aspect of that too is I get the fact that media spend is a little bit easier to justify than on a line item or a proposal, having 2 or 3 agency or costs where, you have to explain that to the executives who are even further removed from that educational, pathway that I was just alluding to than you are. And that's why I kind of come back to making sure that the partners and the people that are bringing it to the table are able to support you in that education. Because, at the end of the day, when you're relying on native targeting, whether it's Facebook, programmatic, Google, in many regards, you're kind of just wasting money if you're relying on those native targeting anymore, especially if you're in the B2B realm. So I think the other thing too is, and as I mentioned before, kind of feeling a little amped up in this podcast prep, when we talk about B2B brands, we're talking about very savvy marketers in many regards. We're talking about people that need to understand the nuances of a very complex buying cycle, buyers that are nuanced in their makeup, in their committees, and really what you sell at the end of the day. But I think it's important that, I get this off my chest in the fact of when are brands, especially B2B brands, going to wake up and smell the coffee, that focusing on the actual, let's say, percent of budget going to media costs rather than the ways in which you use that overall investment effectively and use it to measure and really gain efficiencies through media spend. If you're just focused on how much is going to media and really wanting to maximize that at the end of the day, it's a losing strategy. So let's set the record straight here, to be quite honest. For all of you penny pinchers out there, to drive efficiencies, you need to invest in the tools and the mechanisms that create those efficiencies. And it's important to just lay that out there in the fact that what we want to talk about today is 3 main areas of efficiencies, 2 in particular, that are important for any brand, but especially B2B brands as we kind of march forward in 2023. And to kick off that section of today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit about B2B targeting tools. Those tools that really enhance and allow brands to expand beyond the platforms that historically they've been constrained to because of the targeting that is natively available to them. James, I know this is kind of something that you're really passionate about. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah. So in B2B, almost every scenario, we're dealing with niche, smaller markets. Like we've had a client who specializes in color measurement, right? For color measurement for different products, right? Like this is a very specific niche audience. You can't go on Facebook or Reddit or TikTok or any of these channels and make a list of job titles, roles, responsibilities of the decision makers for a market that's that specific. Facebook just doesn't have those targeting options. Instagram doesn't have those targeting options. TikTok, none of those programs have those targeting options. So historically, as B2B marketers, we've been, we have our own content strategy on the organic side, but on the paid side, you've been running Google ads and LinkedIn. And it's really because you are limited to your ability to get in front of the right people. Facebook ads historically hasn't worked because the only data that you can feed into the system is your own first party data, retargeting lists. That's kind of all that's ever been available. So it's been very difficult to do any sort of prospecting or, persona based targeting on those platforms. And in probably last year and a half, 2 years, there's been an explosion of different B2B targeting tools that now enable you to have that LinkedIn persona-based targeting on any channel you want. So now, instead of being limited to where we have the ability to target our customers, we can focus a lot more on where do our customers actually hang out. You gave the example, we had a prospect come in, they wanted to target dentists and dental hygienists, right? There was 80,000 of them on LinkedIn and only 1,000 of them were actually active within the last 90 days or something. Okay, so that channel's not going to work for them because nobody's ever going to see those ads because they're never on. Those people are on Facebook. They watch TV. Connected TV is now an opportunity for B2B because we have these tools. And I mean, there's a bunch of different tools: Versium, Clearbit, Metadata, Primer, all kind of different tools that you can check out. And obviously, what tool you use is going to industry by industry based on where these data sets are coming from. ZoomInfo probably has the most comprehensive list, but has certain limitations in it. Versium is probably built more for agencies. Clearbit and Metadata are probably better for in-house teams, as well as like, actually poking around and playing in and seeing if they have the data for your ICP. But I mean, we've done it with some very technical industries so far, and it's been a game changer as far as like your ability to test new channels. And when that comes to efficiency, as everybody might know, LinkedIn is pretty darn expensive. CPMs, 50, 70, 80, over $100, depending on the audience and how competitive it is. In the like Facebook, Instagram world, CPMs are 10, 15, 20, $30. So half the cost of what they are on LinkedIn. And now you have the ability to reach the same people at half the cost. And this is where it all becomes like a big testing game, because on Facebook and Instagram, you're in a different mindset. That's another great thing about B2B. If you're in a work state of mind, a business mindset, you probably are going to see higher conversion rates. But now you can balance conversion rate and CPM and actually figure out which channel is going to be the more efficient, where historically that hasn't been an option. So yeah, B2B targeting tools have been a game changer of opening up new channels, opportunities that really a lot of B2B marketers haven't got into at this point.
And James, really what we're talking about is a tool that allows LinkedIn type targeting on other platforms that lack those native features, correct?
Correct.
So how does that work? What's the process? And I don't want to go too deep in this because, we're going to have another episode in the coming weeks, kind of a little bit more focused on this topic, but just to give the audience a little bit of a generic feel for it.
Yeah, I mean, you essentially go into the tool, you build out your target. I would say it's a mix between your target personas and your ICP. So if you want to reach decision makers in the SaaS space who have marketing roles, you essentially plug in all of your target persona information and it spits out a list for you. Now, all of the tools are like a little bit different in how they function. Like Versium and Metadata are really cool. ZoomInfo is the same way, where it exports like a list of the contacts. So you actually can see the company that they work for, a hashed version of their email, what their job title is, what their industry is. It pulls in a bunch of stuff and you can actually go through and scrub that list. So you can say like, oh, half this list is from the automotive industry, which we don't service. Like, I'm going to scrub out all of those people, and you can really narrow down on the exact people that you want to target. You had to put an example on LinkedIn the other day, which I thought was awesome. Like, there are 7,200 SaaS CMOs. Like, that's how many there are. Being able to take that list and only target those people is a lot more valuable than going into LinkedIn and saying people who are interested in SaaS and interested in marketing and in part of these marketing groups. It's just a way more specific way of targeting. But different tools are going to spit out different things. Like, some of them will, integrate directly with the platforms, giving you mobile ad IDs or whatever the device IDs, whatever the platform is. Sometimes you get to see who those people are and who they aren't. But all in all, like, any use of these tools is far more efficient than standard targeting on Facebook, standard targeting on any programmatic platform, standard targeting on Google, especially YouTube being a huge one. So it's all about being able to reach the right people.
Yeah. It essentially removes a lot of the guesswork and narrows you down to basically reach a first party audience that you've created from data that you don't necessarily initially own. An example of that being, you mentioned ZoomInfo, whether you're getting the data from that as a source or another source, directly from LinkedIn as an example here. Creating those customer audiences or prospect audience lists, you're essentially starting to segue from a broader demand gen targeting strategy into something that's a little bit more account based, whether that's contact based or actual companies and the individuals within those. But you're narrowing it down in a way that makes efficiencies much more likely, and the effectiveness of your media dollars towards ROI that much greater of a likelihood. So it's a win-win in that case. And I think to that end, that's where an investment in a tool like that, you're going to get more efficiencies out of that than just throwing more money at a media spend on Google or on Facebook and Instagram without this in place, because really you're just throwing things against the wall with those native targeting and hoping it sticks.
So one thing, just to get like a little tactical on this with the efficiencies, I think one of the things that executives and people reviewing finances struggle with when it comes to tools like this is the level of transparency and and lack of transparency within advertising platforms. So the more and more you get into the programmatic media space, the more transparency there is. So like using, different DSPs to buy media, whatever it may be, because now you actually get, like, in comparison to Google, Facebook, and LinkedIn, there's no transparency around the cost of audience data. But the reality is when you enable an audience on LinkedIn, there's a cost associated with that because they're pulling that data from somewhere. It's essentially a hidden CPM upcharge. So, for example, if we were to run a programmatic campaign targeting SaaS marketing leaders, you could build out an audience that's going to have, people who are interested in SaaS. And each of those interest categories that you build together has a CPM associated with it, a monetary value associated with it. This is essentially the same thing as uploading your own first-party data. And one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is, like, when you're using your own first-party data, there's actually no cost associated with that. So where in the programmatic space, you used to pay a $2.50 CPM upcharge to target the audience you want, now you're uploading your own first-party data, which, yes, you paid for via a tool, but there's no CPM upcharge. So, say you're running a display campaign, probably not what I would recommend, but you're running a display campaign, your CPM is going to go from a $3 CPM using third-party data to a $1.50 CPM using first-party data. So now you're getting double the efficiency from using first-party data for a tool that you may pay 10 grand a year for, right?
That's a good point, James. I mean, I see where you're going with the math there. Stick with your example. You pay 10K for a tool up front, lasts you through an annual license, and with all the CPM markups, regardless of the channel that you're running, there's a very high chance, if not a guarantee, that if you were to have the full transparency into pure media costs versus CPM markups, you're going to be paying way more than $10,000 on a markup if you don't use the first party data you're creating or you own, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, take a look at your retargeting CPMs versus your other CPMs, and I think you'll start to see it pretty quickly.
Right. Yep. That's a good point. The other areas of efficiencies for 2023 include then on the opposite end of that of targeting is measurement, right? Understanding what's working and what's not. Now, no, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of channel source attribution necessarily, or attribution in a deep dive sense, because I think we've kind of beat that horse to death on multiple episodes. But what we're talking about is measurement tech that does give a broader and better understanding around what's delivering ROI and giving you insights into the levers that you pull to maximize the efficiency of those media dollars. Now, James, from a measurement tech perspective out there, we have Google Analytics, but then we have other third-party tools. So what are some of those tools out there, and give a glimpse for our audience into kind of what those do and how they might impact their brands?
Yeah, that's like, I feel like everybody uses Google Analytics, everybody uses in-platform pixels, and I think the big question that everybody has is, like, when do you need to graduate from that? So you have CRM measurement tools, HubSpot, Salesforce, Marketo, that start to give you input into the quality of leads and what happens after a conversion. So that's probably the most important thing, because, we could optimize for conversions all day and them all be spam bots from who knows where, versus understanding like what campaigns are driving legitimate contacts to turn into revenue. So there's a lot of different tech out there that does that. There's multi-touch attribution tools that take a look at the different touch points within a customer journey, understanding how there's a lot of tools out there that show you how different media channels are working together, whether it's a multi-touch, or one of the new things like the bimodal attribution, which hopefully we'll have a guest on to talk about at some point, where you're talking about how different media channels work together. And all of these measurement tools operate based off of a percentage of spend, something that's usually typically really low, 2, 3, 4, 5%. And, it comes down to, are you going to get optimization efficiencies out of that tool that are going to help you save money in actual media spend, right? Like, hey, if we're doing a multi-touch model and we know that we're seeing commonalities in the customer journey, we can start to optimize towards those commonalities. Or if we're finding that one media channel is not a touch point, then it's not a touch point. Totality testing tools is another thing to look at. If you ever have the question of how much of that this is more of an e-commerce thing, to be honest, but like how much of that revenue would have we gotten anyways? We talk about this a lot with branded search, right? Like that they are already searching for us. How much of that would have we gotten anyways? There's tools out there that help you run those types of analysis. So again, I think that's where it really comes to, like, when the question is, when do you need one of those tools versus, just using Google Analytics and Ads Pixels? And I don't know, Andy, did you want to jump into that at all?
Well, I think the one thing that needs to be clarified there is, and you've said this many times, is use the tech for what it's meant for and good for. And platforms and tools like Marketo and Eloqua and HubSpot, they're only good for so much of that. They're really mainly good for a lot of, last touch attribution, obviously automation and piping of data either into Salesforce or to BDRs and SDRs. But what they do lack in many ways is, what is the journey that led somebody up to that point? Now, some do. If you have, in some cases, complicated tagging, tapping onto UTM parameters and tagging the shit out of every freaking piece of traffic you're trying to drive. But it still lacks a lot of the insight that you get pre-click. And I think that's the one thing that needs to kind of get addressed here too, James, is those tools, those are less of an afterthought and less of scrutiny when it comes to an exec, trying to wrap their heads around, why, these tools, like, okay, yeah, these are name brands, so to speak, in the B2B realm. I'm just going to sign off on it. I mean, I'm being facetious there, but you get what I'm saying, compared to a tool that is more unique, but probably has a greater impact on delivering efficiencies for the brand. Those are going to get scrutinized more, especially to your point, James, when we're talking about pricing models based off percent of spend, regardless of how low they are. It's automatically, well, I don't agree with this. Like, why am I going to be, paying a percent of spend? The more I pay or the more I spend, the more I'm going to pay. Well, in reality, to your point, James, the efficiencies, like if you're not able to get greater efficiencies out of your media dollars than the 2% that you're paying, then I would question why you're even running media at all in some capacity, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's about having the people to make those decisions on the back end. So like I think that's the biggest problem with tech and SaaS products in general, is like people are afraid to invest in something because there's a resistance to change in what they're already doing. And when there's a resistance to change, sometimes like people don't end up using the tool. And if you're not going to use it, then don't use it. Like, it's not, I don't think anybody's going to be pleading that case if they're not going to use,
well, it comes back to you get what you pay for, right?
Yeah. I mean, but like I'll use HubSpot as the best example for this. Like, I think, like you said, this is a kind of thing to move forward with if you're a B2B company. But like, if I can now know like the quality of leads that's coming from different channels in which we're marketing, and then funnel budget based on how those are transitioning into MQLs, SQLs, opportunities, pipeline, revenue, like that's much different than me sitting back as a paid media manager and being like, yeah, we delivered 600 conversions this month, and not even telling you what those conversions are. Like that's what you get out of some agencies, some tools, they're just giving you top line stuff because that's all they have. If we are asking you to invest in a multi-touch attribution software, it's because you are running on multiple channels, and we believe that we are going to be getting significant efficiencies around optimizing towards the best performing customer journeys. Now, when optimizing towards the best, that also means that we are reducing spend where it's being wasted. making it things more efficient, driving more revenue within the limited budget that you have.
Yeah. So to set the record straight here, because I think it's important just to align on this, is when we're talking about multi-touch attribution, we're talking really about what touch points are leading somebody to move forward in their process, right? What touch points, what channels are actually creating demand in many regards and leading somebody to move through the purchase path. Basically, what's the setup man and who's coming in to relieve it, right? I talk about a 1-2 punch, or I used to, about, how retargeting comes into play. That's what we're talking about in this. Not necessarily, what leads and what channels are getting attributed to those leads in Marketo, Salesforce, HubSpot, et cetera, but ultimately what channels are influencing those individuals to become leads. Because if we're able to know that and optimize our spend towards creating more demand, creating more opportunities that results in more leads being captured, that's a winning strategy. And I think that is where, again, more education is needed in the B2B world around these types of tools and types of tech that does exist, and getting past the brand names that have become household names, so to speak, in MarTech.
For sure.
I feel like today's topic actually should just goes back to like what grinds my gears rather than maximizing the efficiency. We should really just relabel this. But the last area of efficiency that we want to talk about today is creative. So we have targeting as kind of an input. We have measurement as an output. And there's a whole lot of stuff happening in between. And creative is one of those items that makes or breaks the success of paid media. Now, I think we've talked about this before at length, James, both in an episode, but just individually offline, around the importance of scaling creative. Some of that comes with media spend. Other comes with audience sizes, channels that are in play, and the need to diversify, that mix as much as possible. So in your opinion, what's your recommendation, and how are you advising clients and prospective clients of ours on ways in which creative can actually lead to efficiencies this year?
Yeah, I think what you said about it comes down to being like an audience first mentality, the size of the audience, and layered in on top of that. Like I said before, a lot of B2B marketing is targeting a very small niche audience, right? Like this isn't Nike where you're trying to get your logo out to everybody. There's a select set of people that you can sell to. And with that, in order for B2B marketing to be effective, I mean, we kind of need higher frequencies than what you would expect in a D2C market. Higher price tags, more people involved. There's a lot of reasons for that. But with a higher frequency, there's more ad fatigue. And with more ad fatigue, there's a bigger need to be rotating out and testing different creative. I mean, you really have to balance like those frequencies. There really is no like set number of like when ad fatigue starts to take place, but you also can't expect to run one piece of creative for 3 months, no matter what the audience is. And
yeah, you can only milk it for as long as you can.
Yeah. But I mean, the result, when it comes to efficiency, though, is like crazy. Like we had a client recently, they really weren't doing very regular creative refreshes, and we started doing regular creative refreshes between their team and our team because it's something that we really push for, and their CPAs dropped like 40%. And it was just because you went from it's much. So that's a huge efficiency, something that you're paying for, right? But I mean, when it comes to actual media dollars, would you rather invest in better creative that's more effective, or do some shoddy creative that you run for a really long period of time and try to get in front of as many eyeballs as possible? I put my money in better creative, but you can balance and monetarily look at, how often are we refreshing creative and what are we getting out of that? Should we do it more? Should we do it less? If there's anything that I recommend, it's at least like testing more creative more frequently, and like anything else, you'll figure out where you hit diminishing returns.
And when we talk about creative, we're not just talking about the imagery, we're talking about the creative that supports the various ad types, whether that's carousels, videos, reels, stories, through the whole, gamut of all the ad units that are available to us. Creative needs to be looked at beyond just, hey, I'm going to design an ad or a banner ad. No, it's about being creative and having your finger on the pulse when it comes to testing out all of these different variations and ways in which we can engage and empathize and create that emotional response from our buyers. With B2B, it's a little bit different than consumer side, where it's going to have higher frequencies. It's likely going to have a shorter window until ad fatigue is felt if you're not rotating in and testing out different ways to tell either the same message or deliver that message in a different way across this 20 to 30,000 person TAM that you might have as a brand. And you gave a great example there of, if we're saving 40% of CPA, so cost per acquisition, by creating and delivering more creative on a consistent basis, if I were to take that 40% and throw it at more media, am I actually going to save money? No, I'm going to be paying a higher acquisition cost because I didn't get those savings. In reality, my decision to invest in media over media efficiency is going to result in a lower ROI. And I think that's what B2B marketers and really anybody at a brand needs to start to think about as we move into 2023 and we talk about efficiencies. It's not just, I'm going to change an optimization setting. I'm going to change a bid strategy. I'm going to kill off these competitor keywords. No, it's about the tools and the ways in which you creatively construct a strategy and the execution of that strategy that iterates, that tests, that learns, and that ultimately moves the needle towards ROI and media efficiency and effectiveness. As we kind of come to conclusion today, we talked a lot about the different ways in which we can drive efficiencies. Honestly, we're going to have at least 2 more episodes as follow-ups to this one, where we're going to go a little bit deeper as it relates to those B2B targeting tools that James was talking about, some of the measurement tech, as James alluded to. We hope to have a guest on that's going to talk to us a lot about bimodal attribution, different ways in which brands can look at what's working and what's not. But James, how would you kind of roll up today's conversation for our listeners and give some, specific recommendations or next steps that they should consider in driving efficiencies?
Yeah, I think the main thing to sum it up is don't look at your media plan and costs and tech tools as line items, and make sure you're taking into consideration the efficiencies that you actually get from those tools, that agency. Take a look at the efficiency that you get out of that before you end up cutting the cost. In most scenarios, it probably makes sense to cut from media spend to invest in creative tech, things like that, before it makes sense to cut one of those tools. But if you are on multiple different channels, spending over $100,000 a month, you absolutely should be looking to invest in some sort of measurement tech at that point. Definitely still keep all of these considerations on the table if you end up being in a position where you have to pull back budget. If you're not using any of these tools right now and you feel like you have wasted media spend, I would definitely ask your marketing team, ask your agency about these tools, take a look at some of these opportunities, because B2B can be a lot more efficient than we make it sometimes.
Yep, exactly. So saving 10% on media is going to result in a 20% plus gain in efficiency and ROI potentially. It's a conversation that's worth having and an exercise worth doing, especially when we talk about 23 being the year of efficiency.
It's funny, I feel like we didn't even touch on half the tools that are out. We talked about AI all last episode, having custom imagery versus stock imagery. There's a million different things that we can start to play around with, tests that are going to add efficiency. We're in B2B, so we're in the business of saving time and money, right? So think about how those tools save you time and money, because that's also, their operational costs too. Make sure to consider all those things.
I know I've harped on saying saving time and money on multiple episodes up to this point, but that was actually a good use case. Good job. With that all being said, I think we're all set for today. So I want to thank you all for tuning in for another episode. Obviously, subscribe, connect with James and I on social. We're happy to answer any questions you may have, dive into this topic or others a little bit more deeply. And until next time, hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are uploaded every Friday.